A table for one. As demographics and lifestyles change, more and more people are doing things alone. How does the situation in Japan compare to that abroad, and what kinds of thoughts do different people have on the issue? Dining alone. Not long ago, I found myself in Takadanobaba, a district of Tokyo I had frequently visited during my first years in Japan. Moved by nostalgia, I decided to have lunch at a restaurant that had been popular with students and others in that area for many years. This was a place I had not eaten at in well over a decade, but I was pleased to see it was still open and seemingly doing a thriving business. After walking through the door and requesting a table for one, I was a bit surprised to note that the interior had changed. There were no more tables, only a series of counters, effectively making every seat a single seat. This was not the first time I'd seen such a transformation, I mused. Although I have no hard statistics to back this up, my own experience suggests that more and more restaurants are doing away with large tables and replacing them with smaller ones that could be pushed together and pulled apart as necessary, and adding more and more counter space. A similar phenomenon is also apparent in the travel and tourism business. As an armchair traveler who keeps an eye on such things, I've noticed more package deals catering to people taking trips on their own. And it may be just my imagination, but more advertising in general appears to feature and target individuals rather than large groups. Am I alone in thinking this way? And what, if anything, does it all mean? I decided to try and find out. Living the Ohitore-sama life. Of course, I am hardly the first person to remark on this trend. Media, academic, business, and governmental voices, both inside and outside Japan, have been noting the increasingly solitary lives of the Japanese people for years now. Concern has been raised about falling birth rates, social isolation, economic implications, and other woes. At the same time, some have taken a more positive view, pointing to freedom from restrictive social norms, expanded lifestyle choices, and the fact that many singletons are quite happy living the way they do. Whatever the case, there is little doubt that Japanese society is in the midst of a sea change. When I was growing up in the 1980s, everybody thought of the Japanese as so group-oriented, said one acquaintance from the UK now living in Tokyo. We would always see them in large tourist groups, for example, and we had the image of identically dressed salarymen or schoolchildren. I admitted that this was part of my image of Japan growing up as well, and the nation has often been described as one where groups come before the individual. But these cliches are growing threadbare, we both agreed. Can it really be said that the Japanese are less isolated or more group-involved than those in other countries these days? I have my doubts. A Mexican man I spoke with said, "I've lived in Japan for a long time. In the old days, everyone on the train would be silently reading a newspaper. Now they are all silently tapping away at their phones. I don't see such a big difference." Another man from India said, "I think people are participating less in group activities, but they are more connected through social networks and other virtual activities. And this is true all over the world, not just in Japan. Whether telecommunications bring us closer together or isolate us even more is a matter up for debate, but the impact seems undeniable." Around the world alone. As the man quoted above notes, Japan is not the only place where social life is changing. While much is made of Japan's low birth rate, it is not the lowest in the world, and falling birth rates are the global norm rather than the exception these days. Recently, the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the United States noted that half of all U.S. adults are single for the first time ever, and this has been true in much of Europe for several decades. Birth rates and family patterns aside, many commentators have remarked upon a decline in civic activities and other group-based undertakings across the globe. The issue can be particularly acute for those living and working far from home. I never felt so much alone as I did abroad, at least at first, before I made friends, confessed one Japanese woman. I've heard the same sentiment many times, expressed by both foreigners in Japan and Japanese speaking about experiences in other countries. Homesickness and culture shock certainly add to loneliness for some people spending time overseas, although others report the opposite, describing how excitement, novelty, and a sense of adventure made them less lonely. For most, perhaps, it is a mixture of both. In my own case, I was terribly lonely during my first 6 months or so in Japan, although the feeling diminished as I became more used to my new lifestyle and began to make friends. Lonesome no more. Personally, I am convinced it is a mistake to ascribe the universal human emotion of loneliness to a particular time or place. I also think it is very important to separate the issue of loneliness from the issue of being alone. While it seems clear that social structures are putting increasing emphasis on the individual over the group in Japan and elsewhere, the jury is still out on the ultimate extent and significance of this change. People ask me if I'm sad living alone, but to be honest, I really enjoy it, said a cheerful older Japanese woman I spoke with several years ago. I spent so much of my younger life trying to meet the expectations of others. While no situation is perfect in life, it has been an unexpected joy to have some time to simply be myself as I've grown older. This attitude is not for everyone, of course, and isolation remains a serious problem for people of all ages. Nevertheless, I've never forgotten her words, and recalling them always makes it a little more pleasant when I find myself having lunch alone.